Right. Okay. The Ashes. Are they happening? You've been following this pretty closely in your home base in the United Kingdom, Adam, in terms of I guess what's going on with England players, particularly a bunch of England players who pulled out of the IPL, which would indicate that they are going to the Ashes. But there are other players who are not so keen on going. On it goes, the back and forth, the rapidly changing situation in Australia, blah blah blah. Lay it out for me in 30 seconds or less.
Yes, I think the rapidly changing situation made this more of a problem until maybe a week ago. But now that there are far more jabs going in arms than we might have thought, the rapidly changing situation might be trending in favour of the Ashes going out, being played uninterrupted. Mm-hmm. So, as you say, Johnny Bairstow, Chris Wokes, David Milan joined Joss Buttler and Ben Stokes in not playing in the IPL. And, yeah, some people saw that as, that means they'll be right for the Ashes. They'll get their extra time at home. I saw it the other way, which is that these guys are knackered, and are they really going to subject themselves to a trip to Australia with hard quarantine? And not only that, and this is the really important bit of this, it's not just about the 14 days quarantine. I think everybody accepts that's the price for doing business, and I think there's a broad acknowledgement that in all probability the England players will get the deluxe treatment. They will do it in a resort, possibly on the Gold Coast like the AFL players did last year. And, it won't be that taxing for them compared to sitting in a small hotel room, where
they're not going to be at the Ibis in an executive single
right.
room with a view of a brick wall.
Exactly. And I've done it once before, and I'm looking to do it a second time to get out for the Ashes myself. Like, you kind of accept that that's just the way it's going to have to be for the time being. Although, I mentioned before the rapidly changing situation, maybe it won't be by December. We'll come back to that in a moment. But okay. After that George DeBell piece about the IPL absentees, Dan Breddy wrote a secondary piece for the SMH and the Age, which kind of laid it all out about how, as he put it, how thinly spread this whole thing is, and how difficult it is even for the big nations to keep the show on the road. We saw it at Old Trafford last week. We're seeing it with the IPL. A lot of people are looking into Australia from afar, saying, "Geez, what the fuck's going on there?" It's 19 months after the pandemic started and they've still got half the country in lockdown. Oh, gee, don't fancy that. Don't fancy getting stuck having to do 2 quarantines in Oz. I understand the anxiety around that. And then an extra layer of the school term dates. So usually the players would have their families out for, sort of 3 weeks over Christmas on an Ashes trip. That's quite standard practice. But because they would quarantine the players, this is in one block, their families and their kids who go to school would come out when the school term ends. They would do their 14 days separately, and then they would have 5 days or something like that in Australia before having to turn around and go back for the new school term. I think James Anderson explained this in his column the other day. So the idea of families coming out, yeah, fine, in theory. In reality, they won't see much of them, having just gone through a World T20 in the case of the 3 format players as well. So it's not just, I said this on Twitter on the weekend, it's not a case of back in the good old days, they jumped on a boat and they were on there for 7 months and they played deck cricket and then they went to war afterwards and they came back. Yeah, okay. But, community expectations and parenting expectations have changed in the last 60 years, 70 years. It's not about, and obviously what's happened in the last 18, 19 months, we have a debt of gratitude to these professional cricketers who have been willing to go into a number of COVID-safe bubble environments and really affected their private lives. Remembering, of course, that their job is a professional cricketer. It doesn't mean it has to be their life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You don't sign up to that when you have any other job. So they have made extra sacrifices to keep things going through the last 19 months. But all of this, you put it into a pot and you stir it around and you say, fuck, it looks a bit problematic, doesn't it? Because, why wouldn't senior England players be like, I don't fancy that? However, here's the caveat. I don't know if you saw today, Jeff, but the projections for 70% and 80% are really quite good in Australia. By that, I mean the rates of vaccination. And it may very well be the case that before we get to the Ashes, we've had quite a number of weeks where it's been up to 70 or 80 in some states, which does give CA flexibility. And this is the main point I want to make today about this topic. CA suddenly, I think, might have quite a bit of flexibility here, whereas they didn't before. It comes down to scheduling. If they are willing to, let's say they're trying to race the clock, right? Mm-hmm. they can affect the clock. I mean, they can control time a little bit. No one's forcing them to play the first test match. Well, they can control. They can. They're like Dr. Samuel Beckett stepped into the quantum leap accelerator and vanished. I mean, they do have the ability to stop the clock a little bit, and by that I mean they can just push the test back a little bit if they want to. Get ahead of this. One model I've had put to me is, okay, what if the Ashes start on December 26th at Melbourne? What if we buy the better part of 3 more weeks and we go to Melbourne, which by that stage will well and truly be above 80%, probably closer to 90% double jabbed. Then we have Sydney, and then we sort of consider it from there. We reroute the schedule. You might say, well, what about the England team and what they have after coming up in the Caribbean? I had a look at this. They start with 5 T20s at the end of January. The test matches don't start till the second week of March in the Caribbean. The England team could finish the Ashes at, let's say the first week of February, then go home and see their family for a couple of weeks, assuming that they've not been with them the whole time, and then still make it to the Caribbean for a tour game before playing the first test match over there. It's actually not that sticky at that point. Right. There is a little bit of fat at the end. So
given that Australia, if that were the case, Australia would have played 4 test matches at the back end of the Ashes in 2022. That will be their annual allocation of test matches exhausted, and Australia won't need to play for the rest of the year. So they'll be fine.
Well, I mean, they're all going to go to the IPL in April anyway, right?
Yeah.
That's cool. Like, I'm not anti-IPL, and like players should go to the IPL, fill your boots, whatever, no dramas. But and they'll have played a home World Cup before it. They're going to be an away World Cup. They'll have a home World Cup coming up in October. They'll want to go to the IPL in April. That's fine. This, in theory, in the, let's call it the Collins-Lemon model, they will be done and dusted with the Ashes by, I guess maybe February the 7th or something like that. Mm-hmm. Ample time to have a bit of R&R, maybe play some domestic cricket, and then get off to the IPL thereafter. The reason I'm putting this is not because it's an optimistic. The reason I'm saying this is that this is an optimistic way of interpreting the world. It gives England's players a chance to go home after the T20 World Cup, and then this is the bit I missed before in explaining it. They can bring their families with them to quarantine. If they came out for a test match that was starting on December 26, they could, school-age kids, term would be finishing as they're coming out. Now, I know it's not perfect to go rolling straight from that into a test match, or it may not quite line up as elegantly as I'm putting it there.
It'd be a resort sort of situation. There'll be big jugs of freshly squeezed juice by a pool, and there'll be golf buggies to drive into the sea, and
Well, they might be able to. Maybe they take their kids out of school 1 week early. Yeah, I'm kind of at the margins here, but what I'm steering towards is there is a way of doing this where they can buy themselves some time, and based on current projections, optimistic projections perhaps, I'm not sure, but these are from reputable sources saying that in New South Wales they reckon we'll be above 80% I think it's like the 18th of October or something. So that's one state. Brisbane, on the other hand, where the first test is currently scheduled, 5th December. And we don't know what the states will do with each other after that. So it just gives you that latitude to go, right.
This is where our situation is that in Australia, depending how you want to define it, the states that have been good at or lucky with managing COVID, where they don't have any cases, the restrictions are likely to be stricter there for longer, whereas the states that have been bad at or unlucky with managing it, who've got cases everywhere, are more likely to throw their hands up and say, oh, well, bugger it. I wouldn't be at all surprised if by early December, New South Wales was saying, you don't need to quarantine if you come in from overseas. Potentially, you could just fly them into New South Wales and have the whole Ashes. We were going to have the whole Ashes in Queensland. We could have the whole Ashes in Sydney. Yeah, one at Hurstville Oval, one at Blacktown, one at North Sydney.
We're talking. One at Coffs Harbour, the big banana.
Yeah.
Got to have the big banana involved, Jeff.
Because they could probably just walk out off the plane and start licking people immediately, given the way that trajectory is.
But even the states that have a stricter interpretation, like you're right, the states that are more locked down, still trying to get to zero, or have gotten to zero in WA's case, you could play the 4th test at the Gabba in the final week of January. In other words, buying Queensland another month and a half, and you could play the final test in Perth, where, based on what we read today, Perth are looking like maybe February might be the point they open their borders to other states. It could be quite elegant where you go, Melbourne, Sydney, Adelaide, who might have a tripartite thing going by then anyway, and then from Adelaide onwards to Brisbane for the penultimate test and Perth to finish. Again, I think, and look, I'm sure people are talking about this at Jollymont at some level. Why wouldn't they be? But I don't think we should be so rigidly holding on to December 8. Doubly so given Afghanistan's hit the skids.
Yep.
Now that's not happening. The test players don't need to be playing a test one week and a test the next week. They'll be preparing via Shield cricket anyway. So, yeah, that's where I would leave this chat for mine. And we know per Breddig's piece, the domestic season's got hairs all over it right now too.
Yep.
You know, and this is what Dan had in his piece about New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia. They might have some arrangements between each other. They might be just playing cricket against each other for the first half of the season. Bit of a throwback.
If the lead up to World War I and the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand has taught us anything, it's that nothing goes wrong when you have a tripartite pact. The best possible thing to do is have a tripartite pact. You're all in it together. No worries at all.
One go, we all go. Yeah. Well, anyway, that's how I'm seeing it. I'm not saying we have any influence here on the podcast, but gee, it would help. Imagine where the vaccine rate could be by the middle of December around the country, even in states that have got a very hard border. It might just free things up just enough. And this is, by the way, let's not give a leave pass to the federal government here. The very fact that we're in this situation is the botching, the garden variety botching that has been the vaccine rollout, from the tepid messaging early doors, the sort of suggestion you can go vaccine shopping and wait for the one you want, all the Fortress Australia dog whistling, the inability to buy the right amount of Pfizer, the fetishization of Pfizer as though it's some magic drug, while AstraZeneca's for the poor countries
plebs.
and for the plebs. All that bullshit has all happened and put us in this situation, but it can still be fixed with time and a bit of space.
Right.
So watch this space.
We are up against the forces of Nicki Minaj, though. I don't know if you caught up with Nicki Minaj hopping on Twitter and saying
you get huge bollocks, right? You get,
my cousin's friend in Trinidad got the vaccination, and then his testicles swelled up so badly that he had to cancel his wedding. As people have pointed out, the only thing that has side effects of testicle swelling is chlamydia, which means that he got chlamydia, and then his bride-to-be called off the wedding, and he blamed it on the vaccine.
Imagine trying to blame getting done cheating right before you're getting married, right before the big day. You've got the clap, you've played some shots, you haven't tapped up, you've done the wrong thing. You've really done the wrong thing. Well, it's the vaccine that did it. It's a vaccine that did it.
It's a vaccine. I got that shot, and the next thing you knew, I had pendulous warts growing off my extremities, just leaking like a tap. Yeah.
Speaking of
there are lies that work and there are lies that don't work. All right.